Hi everyone, I'd like to welcome Dilip Sarkar MBE, who's here today to talk to us about the Battle of Britain People's Projects. Hi Dilip.
Thanks. Hi.
Hi. So you're here today to tell us about the People's Project. Can you tell the audience a bit more about the project and
I can indeed. So basically, the idea is there must be, well, we know that there is, there's material out there that, in spite of all the researchers and all the years we've been doing this, there's still material out there connected with the Battle of Britain that remains unseen, whether that's letters, diaries, aircrew logbooks, or observer corps um, first-hand accounts, firemen's first, anything really, absolutely anything. And over the last 40 years, I've traced countless survivors, families, and the relatives of casualties, all that sort of thing, and found this original unseen material that we can then publish and share. And the idea of this project is that it could add value to the 8-volume official history of the Battle of Britain that I'm currently writing for the Battle of Britain Memorial Trust and National Memorial to the Few. So, um, it's really just a final sweep, if you like, to see if there is anything out there. And I wouldn't expect a massive response, because I think, it's not like in 2006 when I did a Spitfire audit with the in partnership with the Imperial War Museum to find out how many Spitfire pilots were still alive, or people who worked on Spitfires or built Spitfires. Of course, those people were still there themselves. So there was a big response to that. Well, that's not the case now. The people who were there have more or less 100% passed away. So we're dealing with families, and it just depends how much those families know, and whether someone in the family has taken it upon themselves to be the archivist and collate and preserve any documents and photographs. So we're in their hands. Having said all that, absolutely terrific response already from Tony Osmond, whose father was a Hurricane pilot during the Battle of Britain, sadly killed fighting the Japanese in 1943. And absolutely encapsulates exactly what this is about, because incredibly, Tony has got 420 letters exchanged between his parents between 1938 and 1943. And the letters tell their own story. I mean, and that story in itself is obviously far broader and wider than the project that we're actually working on in terms of the Battle of Britain. But it just goes to show that there is still absolutely remarkable material out there that people have just hung on to, and perhaps don't even appreciate the historical significance of it very often, and I'm interested just to see anything and everything. And it's then a question of putting things through a filter, isn't it? And seeing what's useful and what isn't, and whether there's anything that could be properly conserved and or preserved, and perhaps displayed in the future, appropriately somewhere. So it's very interesting, and we'll just see what happens. I mean, it's a long-term thing, because writing the 8 volumes, which I would think are probably going to be about 1 million words altogether and take up quite some feet on a bookshelf,
yeah.
it's going to take me a couple more years at least, I would think, to finish the job. So it will just go on.
So it's a long-term project then.
Yeah, it is very much so, and it's really a case of well, it's my legacy really. I mean, I've been fascinated by the Battle of Britain since I was about 5 years old, and have actively researched it since childhood.
Mm.
So, and I was lucky enough to know personally, as friends, many of the survivors. So I had a sort of unique position really, where that relationship, enabled the collation of interviews and a huge amount of, because we used to write letters in those days. So I've got all my letters that they wrote to me. I haven't got my letters that I wrote, but
Mm.
hundreds and hundreds of them where they've recounted their experiences in their own handwriting, which is a very personal and historic thing, really. It's much more personal, isn't it, than an email or something like that. So um, So yeah, I mean, it's looking at everything. I mean, by profession, I mean, I'm a historian now, and you know, have studied it extensively at university and so on. But prior to that, you know, my professional background was I was a police officer, and I was a detective. So you know, I've been trained, and probably have a bit of a natural flair really for communication and interviewing and the detail, you know, and writing statements, because these books it's very much like writing a statement for court or writing a set of court circumstances,
Yeah.
because you're you know, you're sticking to the evidence, you're sticking to the facts, and you're quoting from the first-hand accounts, which in police terms are the witness statements, you know. So that's where I learnt my craft, really. You
Yeah.
know, I mean, when I went to university, I went as a mature student, and after I left the police, actually, I thought, well, you know, I've been a fellow of the Royal Historical Society for years. I better go and learn how to do it properly. And it was great fun, but really, I don't think I learned that much. You know, I mean, my craft was learnt as a 21-year-old detective. You know,
Yeah.
all those years ago.
And then
So
it gives you that, I suppose, knack of being able to scrutinise what you've actually got in front of you as well.
oh yeah, I think also it's it, everything has to be about evidence.
Mm.
Everything, you
Yeah.
know, and that's it. I mean, you can, you know, time and time again, I read things where people have clearly shoehorned the evidence to fit their own preconceived theories,
Yeah.
you know, or the outcome that they want, and that is just so totally the wrong way to go about it. And you know, how many thousands of times, you know, I've thought, even right doing this series now, you know, thinking that something happened, and then actually finding out that all the evidence contradicts what you thought. And
Yeah.
you know, it's no, and even it very frustrating, because I mean, a lot of the official records, they're inaccurate. Makes you wonder how many of them were made up after the event, quite honestly, because they bear little semblance to reality. And the times are all contradictory, of combats and locations and takeoff times, and one record will say one thing, another will say another. Very difficult to get to the bottom of it. But if you can't get to the bottom of it, say you can't get to the bottom of it. Explain that the primary sources are contradictory, you
Yeah.
know, because that's only to be expected. I mean, you know, I mean, my partner Sue was a detective chief inspector, and you know, she's worked on some very big inquiries. And I said to her, you know, what this is like is trying to reconstruct a violent disorder involving 150 airplanes or more, all moving at 350 mph.
Yeah.
You know, and if you were investigating a big violent disorder, and you've got 50 statements, say, all of those statements are going to say a different thing. They're going to have seen it, the same events, but they're all going to differ
Yeah.
slightly. So that's it. That's always underpinned my work. It's got to be evidence based, and very often the evidence flies in the face of the popular narrative and the myths that have grown over the years. You know, and to me, it's important that there should be an accurate account, and it's nothing to do with revisionism.
Mm.
You know, I mean, we hear about this all the time, don't we, about revisionism? It's nothing to do with revisionism. It's because very often nobody's really scrutinized and looked at the facts
Yeah.
and produced an account that is factually based.
Mm-hmm.
And people, you know, somebody writes something that's not right. I mean, I'm going through a book I wrote, how long ago now? 13 years ago, 14 years ago, The Few. And that was a day by day thing of the Battle of Britain, only a précis of each day, not a microscopic forensic deconstruction like I'm doing now. But you know, there's quite a lot wrong in that, actually, as I've gone through, and I've gone, oh, blimey, you know, that's wrong. I didn't know that, you know. But a historian is only as good as his or her sources.
That's it.
And 14 years ago, those sources were the best I had to hand.
Yeah.
You know, today it's different. research is so much easier today, incredibly easy with the National Archives being online. And just been able to download PDFs, combat reports. I mean, we've got them all. We've got every single combat report and every single operations record book from every single unit, you know, involved in any way. And it's great. You can just call it up. There it is. You've got it at your fingertips.
Yeah.
Whereas years ago, you know, it's a case of physically going there, and even digital photography hadn't really taken off then. So you were using the old extortionately priced PRO photocopier.
Yeah.
So time moves on. I mean, a great, you know, it's historiography, isn't it?
That's it. I mean, I find that certainly with genealogy as well. You know, you have the one thing I always say to people is check the primary sources.
Absolutely.
State the facts. You know, if you can't find the answer to it, don't make it up.
No, exactly.
You know, I think most researchers see information written down that's sort of been, well, that's the closest match, so that has to be correct.
Exactly.
Well, not necessarily. But yeah, I found that as well. You know, there are so many records 10 years ago, 15 years ago that were not available that now you research and you say, gosh, you know, I couldn't find that 15 years ago.
Well, you've only got to look at something like the historiography of the Holocaust, because the Holocaust, naturally and rightly, you know, as a voluminous bibliography, but the interpretation has changed over time, with from the end of the war to particularly when the Soviet bloc fell, and researchers managed to access all the records that were in Russian hands, and that has changed, you know, quite a lot of the understanding of how the Holocaust developed. So, you know, I read a very stupid thing the other day that some author or other had written about, you know, some work they were doing, and it you know, for years the standard reference on this subject has been X, whatever it was, and you know, now 40 years after publication of the book, we're discovering this is all wrong, you know. But that's so disrespectful to the historian concerned who produced what was actually a seminal work at the time. Because the information that's available today, particularly in our world, from the German side, for example, you know, there is much more there. So time moves on. You know, history is a science, really.
That's it. That's it. And as you say as well, there is often, you know, a lot of collections sitting in either private hands or with families. You know, that, I mean, I remember my mum telling me that when my gran got older, she burned all the letters that had been written between her and my grandfather during the war, because they were newly married. Probably was personal information in there, and information she didn't want to perhaps share with family, which I think is a shame, because we could have learned so much more about his experiences as ground crew with the
might not have done though, because the letters, they don't contain, in my experience anyway, not an enormous amount about day-to-day stuff. You know, it's more about what's happening back at home. You know, that's what everybody wanted to know about. But yeah, letters are a very personal thing, aren't they?
So how can people get in touch with you? How can they contribute to the project?
Yeah, I mean, if anybody's got anything, whether, you know, it's any kind of diaries, letters, particularly photographs, any accounts that anybody's left behind about even watching aircraft crash or anything at all. And the more obscure, the better. You know, what about the guy who's driving the steamroller, who's filling in the potholes that they've created the runways? You know, I mean, what about that? What a story that would be. You know, there's a famous photo of some Spitfires lined up at Hornchurch, and in the background there's a steamroller repairing the runway. I mean, wouldn't that be great to find out more about that person? So anything and everything. Google Battle of Britain, the People's Project, and the website will come up. There's a contact form on there. Or Google me, Dilip Sarkar, author.com. You can contact me through my website, or Facebook. I don't do Twitter anymore. Twitter drove me insane, so I deleted my Twitter account. But I'm a big Facebooker, so I'm not difficult to get hold of. And, you know, anybody out there, please get in touch and we'll have a look at what you've got. And it may well find its way into the official history, you know.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing that today, Dilip. And
Pleasure.
I'll share
Pleasure.
all the links that you've spoken about with
Thank you.
everyone. Thank you.
Brilliant.